Right, this is part 8 of the series on tunnels, and we are still looking at understanding how to use the animated swap images. There are two more things I want to cover. One is to work with image sequences that are in a separate file, so file sequences. As we saw earlier, we can, if we have an animation, we can go to the timeline like this and find an option to composite not just from the swap image like this option here, but also composite with sequence from Targa images or BMP bitmap file, JPEGs and PNGs. So those are going to be covered in the next tutorial. This one here though, I'm going to show something that goes a little bit into a slightly different direction, still using the animated swap at some point. But we are not going to composite. In this case, we will be doing a combination of the two, but in an additive mode. And many times, if you have some bright items that are moving against dark background, that may be good enough to just make it look like we're compositing it. It's not exactly the same, and if you look at the fine detail, it may look a bit different. But this will do just fine for what we want. And what I'm thinking is kind of this slow dripping text series, you know, like bits that move down from vertically from the top down, kind of like in the movie The Matrix. Everybody has seen that movie, and you see a black background and then kind of green or dark blue text bits of ones and zeros and ones moving down, a little bit of noise, some motion trails, also some ghosting, and we'll see how far we can take that. So in order to start, we need some text. And we have actually a tool called the text tricks that takes an existing image and then modifies it to kind of put text on it. I'm going to start with an image a little bit smaller. Let's make it 640 by 480, because what I'm going to demonstrate is quite intensive, compute intensive, and I don't want to waste too much of your time just showing how to do this. So here's a starting point, initially white. Let's go and erase it to black, switch the primary and secondary colors, for instance, erase to black. And if I ever need to get this really quickly, I can store this image, store an image copy here. So if I do any sort of drawing here and later I decide, no, let's go back, just click here and that restores it. Now I'm showing an animation here. I don't actually have an animation yet. This is from my prior sequences. And so here we go and turn this into an animation. Let's go create an animation of I don't know, let's do just 30 initially. We'll probably change that. In fact, you know what? We're not quite ready to do the animation yet. Let's free it. That's always good to know how to do that. From the animation menu, let's free it and get back to just one. Let's close the animation toolbar, and all we have is a static image. What I want to do is load a noisy pattern in there. You could go to the render menu, for instance, here and get some plasma noise. That's a good starting point. Let's bring it a little bit smaller there. And this one, we will now apply the text tricks tool to that. So text tricks, there it is. And what we'll do, you can see on the left side what it kind of tries to do. It's putting some text on it. You can click apply, and you'll see what it looks like by default. Progress bar. This is too dense. I want more sparse letters. So we need to reduce the bandwidth probably. Let's try that. Keep an eye on the upper right corner here. That's not it. Let's do the bit depth. Let's bring them all the way down to 0 here and see. Okay, that's much better. That's not perfect, but better. And one thing I'll do is I'll try the XY serialization and probably the color a little bit more bluish. Red, green, blue. Let's give it some green and some blue, kind of like this. Okay, we can always change that later on with the hue control filters. The font maybe we can change also, although this will probably be just fine. But just in case we want something a little bit bigger, we could change it right there and click apply or OK, and I will apply it. Actually, that did not take that last font change. Not sure why. Or why not? So, but anyway, we'll work with this. This is good. Let's go and store a copy of that, because this is just perfect. In case we need to get back to it, remember, we just click here and it restores that image. Now what I'll do is to simply turn this into an animation. So let's go to the create menu under the create option under the animation menu, and say we want 30 frames a second, and we want this to last, oh, I don't know, 5 seconds, so let's give it 150 frames, something like that. Click OK, and now we have an animation sequence, but of course they're not falling down yet. What we need to do is make it so. We need to use the timeline filter and apply some shift transformation. I mean, there is a couple of ways to do this, two at least I can think of right now. One is the transform, which also allows you to do the rotate and scale changes, but we probably just need the shift, and we need it to tile, so anything that shifts down to the bottom is going to come back up on the top side, and so it keeps going endlessly. It looks like it's seamless and endless. Not necessarily seamless, by the way, but let's go reset this and actually start. We can use the vertical or translate Y to change the amount of translation applied, and we'll go on a small amount first. So this is going to be perhaps from here to here, not a large amount of translation. We'll go to the very first frame and keyframe that right here, and then we'll go to the last frame and we'll change it for a linear transition. We don't want a spline interpolation. We want a straight line, steady going, and keyframe that. So we now have a change. Oh no, wait, we forgot this. We need to make this go like that. Okay, so we now have a parameter that goes from negative value somewhere down there to the positive value up here. And you can preview it. As you scrub through that, you can see how this thing is just moving down vertically ever so slightly. Let's apply that. And now we can preview it, and so here it is. Let's go store that animation right somewhere here on disk, and that should not take more than a few seconds. And now we can go back to this original, or we can undo, so we have the shift going away, and we can do another one. What I want to do is make it bigger and make it appear as if it's closer. So these are the far ones, and now I'm going to go to the transform and scale it up a little bit, maybe this much. Right, so these are bigger, and apply. There's no need to keyframe it. It's going to apply it across the entire sequence the same way. And now we have bigger letters, and we still want to transform those as well now, so shift them here, and this time again we'll shift them, but this time we'll make them move faster because we want to make it look like they are indeed closer to us. So we will have them move not from here to here, but a larger distance in the same time frame or in the same number of frames. So click that, go to the end, change it over here, click that. Now we have a transition or a shift that will make it look like it's going much faster. All right, let's store that one too. Actually, before we do that, let's bring it a little bit brighter, because that's one thing too that you can do in order to make it look like it's closer, make it move faster, but also make it more intense, brighter, higher contrast, more saturation on the colors and that sort of things. Perhaps a little bit more on the reddish tints as well. So one thing we can do is we go to the filter and adjust the color, for instance, and we'll multiply the color with a little bit more red, and perhaps a little bit more green and blue as well. So it will brighten it up overall, but the amount by which you make it brighter perhaps favor the red a little bit, so it's going to look less cold. Warmer is usually associated with something closer. And let's apply that to the entire animation, all the same, and all frames will benefit from that brightness increase. And there it is. So let's store that one. We now have two of those animations. There you go. And there we go. So we have one. If we click here, we can restore it. That's the small ones here. Click this one, restore it. We have the bigger ones, and they move faster. You can see that here. You can preview it here, and we can preview the one we currently have loaded. I'm going to go one more time. I'm going to take, let's say, this one here, the original image, and scale it up even bigger. So this one is going to be, what is it, 150 frames. Let's go create a new animation of 150 frames. See, there's many different ways to get about going this, to do this again and again, different order, whatever you want to do. And I'm going to apply the transform one more time, this time to go full size, and perhaps not even stop there, but apply it even one more time. Let's do that one more time to make them really big, right? So maybe that's a little bit too much, something like this. Okay, apply that. All right, and also bring them into much higher brightness levels here. So here we'll really go into value adjustment. There it is, and make them bright. and perhaps keep them at a little bit higher contrast, so only those that are bright will remain really bright. You could change the gamma, you could change the contrast, a couple of different ways to work with that, and apply that, and then of course shift it. So let's go apply the shift transform one last time, most likely. What I'm trying to do is basically get to having a few of these transforms. This one is going to shift so fast. It's going to look a little bit repetitive though, because we do have only a small amount of imagery here to work with now. Maybe we can move this sideways a little bit like this, and then still change. Yeah, something like this might be good. Alright, so keyframe it, and then go over here to the other side, keyframe it, so we have a very fast movement here now, and apply that. It's actually cycling through it 3 or 4 times. Alright, now one thing I'm also going to introduce here is motion blur. Now there's a couple of ways to do that, and because this one's moving fast, we kind of need to have a little bit of this effect that we remember seeing in the Matrix movie, where as if it's like liquidy, or it sticks to a surface of glass or something, and it looks like it's dragging it. So that's something we can kind of simulate with the ghosting effect in the timeline. It's not the only way to do it, but that's probably a good convenient way to do it. Anything that's bright will be ghosting, or will be leaving a ghost mark of 4 images or more. This one's going fast, so we'll give it more. Maybe the other animations, we can make them do the same thing but to a lesser extent, and simply apply that. So now this filter is interesting because it works backwards. It works from the last frame towards the first frame. It seems like the animation is going backwards now as it previews it during the work. But once it's done here, you can see you can play the animation, and you see this little motion blur or trail that each of the bright elements have. Maybe it's faded a little bit, so you might want to do something else here to add to it. One is you could of course simply go back to the filters we used already, like the value adjust, and adjust the contrast a little bit, so that you may perhaps see a little bit more of the really bright parts here. You see how you can totally over exaggerate it, but that's an idea. The other idea that I just think might be really interesting too is to start using the swap. So I'm going to store image. I'm going to store this animation as it is, even though it's not perfect yet. It will be part of what I want to use. I'm going to store that, and that's right there to disk. And so I have it here, and then I'm going to undo this most recent animation, so it's revealing again what I had before I applied this ghosting. Click undo. Alright, so now I have this image without the ghosting. I'm going to store that too. This is just sort of a safety precaution. I might just need to get back to it as well. So now, how do I combine this image, which doesn't have the ghost, with this one, which does have the ghost, right? If I show it here a little bit larger, I can see it. The very first frame doesn't have much ghosting, but then it shows it. And what I'd like to do is really combine this with this one to some extent. Right, so this one shows the bright without the ghosting, and I'd like to combine the other one. So all I gotta do on this stored copy that has the ghosting is click here, check the use as animated swap image. You can, by the way, if you're not sure if that is the one, you can always resample it here, resize it a little bit dynamically to see it in at better scale. And then you can go and say, okay, since that one is now selected as the animated swap image, it's being used in that instance, and this one here is the one that I currently am looking at as I'm scrubbing through that, you can now combine the two. Remember from last session, from last training, we had the swap image defined and started to use that. Well, we have a swap image that we can use, and it's this one here. That's the image sequence on the swap, and that's the same animation except without the trailing, without the ghosting. So we can combine the two simply by clicking here, or we can combine the two here by filter, combine with swap, and you can mix how much of one or the other image buffers you want to show. Right, so you could say, okay, I want to show completely this one or completely the other one with the ghosting, or somewhere in between. But instead of actually mixing or sort of reducing one while increasing the other, even better, how about if we just add them together? So we have over here combiner swap. We could go to additive mode, and now we actually apply an additive of the bright images that don't have the ghosting with the other images that do have the ghosting from the swap side. Apply that over the entire sequence, and you now have an animation that combines the two together. You can do that again. You can say, well, I still want to add even more of this. Or you could go and undo that. Now, you don't undo what you just did before. You undo the most recent thing you did in the timeline, but that will be just fine. Or you can click here to restore that one. This one is still designated as the animated swap. And so another place to actually see this in action is to simply click here on this big icon in the upper right corner. When you do that, you're doing, or right click it to see more, you're enabling the swap mixing with that. And in what mode? Well, by default, it's default or multiply mode, same thing. But here we can go again, screen or additive, or no, try any of the others. Lighten, that might work for some images or some scenarios. I think additive or this one here, the OR mode, the glow might work also. Yeah, I mean, you'll see a couple of different results here depending on which one you choose. Additive is really good because it gets you to see both. In an interesting way, and that is not always the case depending on the imagery that you're actually dealing with, but in this case that's what I want to use. And I will now simply right click here and say merge with swap, so the two are being combined frame for frame, and since one was basically a derivative of the other, they look very much synchronized. We might still want to brighten it up a little bit. We might want to increase the brightness perhaps from the filter here. Under adjust this, we might want to make them brighter here, or adjust a little bit at this level, reduce the contrast or increase, all sorts of different fine-tuning options that you can explore to see those trails a little bit stronger. We might need to blur them also a little bit, so let's apply that. You see actually that they move pretty fast, so you can tell each of the letters apart here if I'm zooming in, and maybe we don't want to see that too much. So what I could do, I would perhaps imagine is doing a little bit more of that ghosting, but at a different amount, a lesser amount, so it kind of blurs across it. That would be done simply like this here, perhaps about 4 or 5 levels of ghosting. And that might just smear it enough that we don't see that too much. Then you might want to reapply the more intense one in an additive mode. So you could, for instance, say don't use this one, use this one now that doesn't have the ghosting, but again apply it in additive mode, so that brightens it up even more where it's already bright. Right, that's the whole thing about it. So let's go do that, combine them together, make sure the combine mode is still additive, and go and enable merge with swap, so the two will now be again added one more time. And do it again, do it 2, 3, 4 times so that the bright parts get even brighter. And let's do that, merge with swap one more time. And at some point we have very bright levels. We can perhaps increase the contrast a little bit so that the dark parts, which are not totally dark right now, we could perhaps expand the dynamic range so it will go to total blackness and it will have reached total brightest levels for some of these. And with that we now have this animation that I want to call my foreground animation. So I'm going to store that one as well, of course, right here under animation, store animation, and we now have a couple of animations we can work with. This one we don't need anymore, this one we can toss also, but we do have a couple, like this one here may have been the very first one, and then this one here. So let's see what they look like. This one is already a little bit on the sparse side, right? You can tell here that it's not that dense anymore. So that may be number 2. And then here's number 3, the one that's the farthest away, the smallest. The letters are the smallest, and there are plenty of them, but they're moving slowly. Right? So if I play this, you can see it's kind of moving slowly, and you might want to make it even a little bit darker. Nothing wrong with that. Let's go do that right here from the let's see, from the color add or color adjustment, for instance, like this. Perhaps reduce the red a little bit so that it leaves it a bit more cold blue and gets darker at the same time. And so now we have that. So you can see now it's a bit more on the bluish side. Right, okay, so let's store that one. Let's keep that as one of the animations we definitely will want to use. And we could also add some blurring to that, especially if we want distant blurring, right? More of a Gaussian blur. In fact, let's do that. Let's add a tiny little bit of blur that's more of a motion blur, like a vertical motion blur, and or a Gaussian blur. Maybe both, maybe a little bit of both. We just don't want too much of it, so we still want to be able to recognize the letters here. Let's apply it once and see what that looks like. Yeah, you know what, that's too much. We will see that something's moving, but it's just too much of that. So let's go and undo. And that's really why we need this level of undo here, because without it would be lost. Let's try to see if we can get just one level. No, there's a minimum of 2 for the Gaussian blur. Maybe the dissolve could be used to reduce the intensity of that. Let's see, apply that. Yeah, that's better. It's a little bit of blurriness, but not too much. Alright, so let's store that. Actually, one more we could do is perhaps also a little bit of motion blur. And that motion blur we will do in the vertical direction. Don't do too much. It's a bit difficult to see here in the preview because it's so minute. I guess what you need to do is see if that's the right way, simply by applying it and then reviewing it in the larger view. And of course it's not. It's doing a sideways movement. So we need to rotate that angle by 90 degrees. Let's go and undo. And then apply a 90-degree rotation to the whole motion direction. 89, you know, if you can't reach exactly 90, that's okay, don't sweat it. Nobody will tell. 89 will be fine. We probably need to change this so we can actually I don't know if we can use the arrow keys. No. We probably need more granularity. A wider slider would be good for that, so that we can get a little bit more granularity and actually go for a single pixel at a time. But this is good enough for that, and what we'll do is apply that. And so at this point, yeah, at this point we have that blur, but it's too much of it. Definitely too much motion blur here. So again, undo that and just give the length a tiny little bit here. See if that's better. Yeah, okay. So it looks like it's moving down, right? It has this motion blur look like, but it's different from what we did earlier with the ghosting, because this really becomes unreadable to some extent. So in other words, I don't like it. Let's undo let's undo that and instead resort back to ghosting. But instead of doing the ghosting over 10 or so levels, we'll do it only over 2 or 3, let's say 4 there. And then that way it will be kind of similar to the motion trails that we see from the other parts, but it won't be that intense. Alright, we don't really need to be able to read them too well, but we still want to be able to see that these are digits, zeros and ones. Alright, that one's good. That one's the back animation. Let's store that. Animation store to disk. So this one's probably ready to use. Number 2 was this one here, and that one's bigger, and we still need to do a little bit of blurring with that as well, or ghosting. Let's do it just here while we add it, and perhaps a little bit more of it, and go. Now this one moves faster already because we did, you know, zoom in to make it look like it's closer. We made it bigger, but also move faster, and there we go. And again, one thing we can do is same thing with like we did with the big one in the foreground. Maybe this time I'll use a different technique. I'll simply go to the filter, let's see, adjust color, and give it a little bit less red, and let's see, reset that, and just make it brighter, maybe even a slightly different hue or tint here, just a bit more on the greenish side, something like that. Okay, apply that to the entire animation. There you go. And do we want any sort of blurring? Let's see what sort of blurring we do have. Oh, we have one that's interesting here, the Radial Blur, Mystic Vision, Bokeh Blur. Okay, so the Bokeh Blur is really interesting in some cases. What I'll do is I'll see if I can get some sort of a lens bloom effect here. Look at that. That's too much, but I mean there are some really interesting effects you can have with that too. Bias, that's interesting. And the edges, do you want to see the edges a little bit more? Intensity, less of it. Bloom, So the radius of the blur here, there you go. So that's interesting. We have some other types of blurs we can create with that. Add a little bit of bloom or bloom brightness. Threshold, no, not too much. There you go. And then we can even map it to a gradient. I mean, look at that. How cool is that? All right. So let's go, and in fact we can do a side by side. Click on that. You see the left side does not have the bokeh blur and the right side does. And what you could do now at this point is simply apply that. So, and in fact animate it across the entire series, the entire image sequence. So animate that, and that way it will apply that bokeh blur all across. So we have now 3 animations, right? That's the story here. We have one with tiny little ones in the back, pretty dark. We have this one that we still need to store, animation store to disk. And then we have this one here. That's the bright one, ready to rock. So this one here we can get rid of, this one too. This one you can get rid of. Be careful though, don't get rid of stuff that you're not sure you might still need perhaps. Alright, so we have an animation like this. Yeah, and see, that's where it ends. Nope, that's not where it ends. Okay, so we're still good. Alright, so we have this one here. We have this one. A little bit smaller, a little bit farther, a little bit slower, and then this one here. Far away, dark, and slow. Alright, how do we combine those? How do we make it look like they are all stacked up there, but in different depths, different levels? Simply use combine by swap, right? So we have, let's say for instance, this one here in the background, the smaller ones first, right? And then we choose the next level, this one here, make this here, click this to make it animate that swap image. Now if you didn't have it stored, you could have saved it on a file either as a DWA, dog waffle animation, or you could have saved it as a AVI file. And either one of those you can then say, oh, let's use it as an animated swap image. We've started to do that in version 8, I believe. So this is a great way to combine 2 different animations just the same way. But here it's so much more convenient for your workflow, because all you got to do is check this box, and that makes this animation used as the swap animation. Now, how do you use that at the same time? Well, you have to blend them. You have to make sure that you blend them together, or merge them or mix them in an additive mode, for instance, right? That's what we saw earlier. So now when you look at that in detail, you can tell that, oh my goodness, there are 2 animations indeed, and one of them is moving faster than the other. Here, let me play it. Well, yeah, this animation mode is not going to reveal the blended mode unless you actually scrub through it, because there's a performance update hit there. So what we want to do is actually apply it to then preview it as a final result. Now you can do that here. You can right click, we've seen that, and merge with swap, or you could use the filter, combine with swap, same thing with the additive mode, and apply that to the whole animation. Boom. Or you could have combined it here, even though you're not changing the amount of combining. You can say combine with add, and in fact you could do that the second time if, for instance, the animation in the background is too bright when compared to an animation in the foreground letters. You can add the foreground letters one more time, and you can see here in the preview that they're going to be quite a bit brighter. There they are. Okay, so we've done it twice, and that's not the end of it. The next thing is to switch over to the ones with the really big letters and say, no, these are the ones we use as animated swap now. So uncheck this and make this one the animated swap. All right, so now as you scrub through that, you will have this one as well. Actually, wait, no, it's maybe the other way around. Where is it? Okay, so let me store this one first, just to be safe here, and make sure we have a copy of that to disk. Store this animation and make this one the current animation. Then we can store, we can use this one as the animated swap. And what else do we need to do here? There is something that's not happening. Oh, we need to show them together as additive. There you go. Now we have 3 levels of animation. All right. So we have now the animation that's in the swap, just like before. with the animation in the front, and we combine them both together. But one of them is a combination of two animations that we just rendered before. So we have a total of 3 layers now that are moving and at different speeds and appear at different brightness levels too. Alright, so here for instance we can see it in the preview as well. Apply that. Alright, so we could go endlessly here and just keep doing and more of those. Let's go and save one of those. Animation, save, that will be a quick DWA animation format, or we can go to the save AVI and I'll save that to a file, something like this, 30. Maybe the current folder is fine. Let's just save it as my favorite Lagerif lossless codec. Lossless is good as long as you still work with it. Don't worry about disk space, or just get extra disk space. It's cheap enough. You do want to make sure that whatever you create is not suffering from compression based loss, so that you get some artifacts and stuff like that. Make sure also you test it after saving it to AVI. Make sure you are able to view it here on the show. Click on the show button, and then that way it will play it. You can make it full screen and it will play it in whatever your default image viewer or animation movie viewer is for AVI files. This one here is of course Windows Media Player. And so that's good. Not quite done yet though. So one more thing I wanted to do. If you remember the movie Matrix, there was also a little bit more noise here, or turbulence. It seemed like it was crawling down and changing or distorting the letters as they were coming down. It's difficult to describe exactly, and I don't know, maybe there is some place where it describes on the internet exactly how that was done or what the technique is. It's sort of a combination of distortion or displacement and scintillation changes. I want to show you one example or one technique to use something like that. And basically it still uses the animation in the swap buffer or swap images, the image sequence, but not just to do a combine like we did here, or a composite like we did in a prior tutorial. This time we'll use a displacement. So I wanted to just show that because you can actually use the animation also for displacing what you see here in the foreground. So what do we currently have in the animated swap? It's this one here. Right, now is that the bright one? No, it's the one down there. That's perfect. That's what I needed. Alright, so we can actually see the two together, and we can say instead of combining them, we can displace them. Okay, so we can displace the animation you see here. Displace it by what? Well, by the image that is in the swap buffer. So the swap image sequence, go to filter for instance here and look under displace by swap, and there are a couple of different ways to do it. Maybe color twirl, maybe normal, maybe pool, play with those. Displace is the original one, looks great still, and in fact that one may be just perfect. You see a little bit, don't go too far, you don't need much. You see a little bit of distortion here, and apply it on the entire animation. Now I'm going to show you a trick before I do that. I want one level of undo on this. The thing is, we only have one level of undo here. So one thing I can do is do something at this level of the animation, something that doesn't do anything really. Like I can do a color adjustment, but then basically do nothing to it. Or pick a color that's not going to multiply. But really, if I keep it like this, at the original intensity, let's reset this, it doesn't change the brightness, right? So if I apply that, there's no change. If I undo, I just restored the same thing. So it is actually a good way to kind of say, oh, I can click undo now, and it's going to go back to this most recent animation that I now also have in the undo sequence, in the undo buffer. Alright, so I can now do any sort of changes here, mess this up, and simply click undo, and it will restore the original. Alright, see, all gone. Alright, so now what I'll do is click the filter for displace by swap and experiment with that. Alright, and let's apply that to the entire animation, the entire sequence of images, and maybe it's good. Let's play it and see if we can tell any sort. It's going fast. It's maybe going a little bit too fast, but I think we can tell there is a little bit of displacement happening. Let's say we're not happy with it though. Let's say we want more. Click undo. Boom. Now let's go and apply the even stronger amount of displacement. Displace, and let's go with a lot of it. you can almost see kind of like it's almost like when you have water, raindrops hit the windshield or something, or window, and you see sort of refractive bubbles, refractions from the raindrops that stick to the windshield, to the glass. So apply that, and now it's starting to look very disrupted, right? Actually, too much up here. There's a sort of an edge condition where it's not going to be usable. But you can see that this is definitely a new universe of additional very weird effects you can create. Almost like, imagine if this were red instead of blue-green. Let's invert it, or something like that. You could actually, we should have probably, let's see, undo that. We should have actually rotated the colors here. Let's do color, roll or swap. I don't know. Let's try roll. There you go. We got the reddish tints showing. It almost looks like fire coming down from the sky. And so now, if you have effects like meteor showers or something, this could be an interesting effect for that. Undo that. Go back to this. And one thing I'll do now instead is use a different place where we can do displacement mapping, and that's right here. Displays again by swap, which is the animated swap. Right there, displays, cloaking displays. That's another good one too. Not always for everything, but let's see if that one looks good for a little bit of cloaking displacement. Apply it, and if we like it, we'll keep it. And we don't. So let's go and undo. And try one more. There is the pool displays. That one is interesting. It looks like it's rotating around in circles when you look at it slowly. Let's give that a try. Okay, apply that. And wow, these letters are very much distorted. But that's what we probably are seeking to some extent. So sometimes you'll actually find the best mix by combining this with the one before the displacement, kind of blending them together, right? And we've done this already. We store this, we undo, we recombine with this as the animated, and so you can find a lot of different ways to further use this. Of course, one thing also is to combine that, use that now as an animated elevation map in PuppyRay, right? So even more fun stuff to explore. Anyway, I wanted to explore that a little bit and expose some of the techniques that you can use to create some interesting effects with that, because sometimes this is what's going to make for a really interesting wall on a tunnel, and or the background, right? We're going to have some tunnels and we see some holes and we see through the holes and we want to see something behind it, and this could be a very ethereal or mystic light show happening in the sky. And that's pretty much it for now. I think we have explored a lot of things in this tutorial that are going to be very useful one way or another, I'm sure. And so thanks for watching. We'll have another tutorial coming soon, continuing this mini series, and not so much mini anymore, on the creation of what shall we call it, on tunnels. But it turns out here, this is really fascinating, just doing a little bit of exploring some of the displacement maps, and I feel like I'm being watched. The matrix display here seems like each of these dark shapes here looks like the shape of some men in black or something, some suits watching you and keeping an eye on you. So just something that occurred to me here. What a coincidence. It looks like a human shape here, a body in dark. Anyway, thanks for watching, and have fun with Howler as you go along with this series. Thanks.